We're going to be talking about living a life that embraces the unexpected and the unknown versus preferable and unpreferable. The inspiration for this podcast came from a quote that I saw. It was actually a long while ago. Things are neither positive nor negative in astrology, they just exist. And I thought it would be interesting to extrapolate that out into just life generally. So this concept has helped me reflect a lot on the way that I want to live and the way that I want to be in the future. What do I want to spend my time on, and how do I want to spend my time feeling? So now that I have the awareness, that also comes with the ability to choose whether or not I stay in a certain space, like a space of mind. I guess you have the opportunity to leave a certain physical space as well. If anybody ever makes you feel like you don't have that freedom, you do. Be aware that while we're talking mostly about mental or emotional space today, you still can apply this to your physical space as well. I have had a ton of opportunities to learn this. I bet you have too if you think about your life. So let's talk a little bit about the history of these ideas. In the 6th century BC, in the Tao Te Ching, the credited author Lao Tzu discusses the concept of duality. It is the concept of the yin yang. There cannot be light without dark. There cannot be death without life. There is no immortality. There's no everlasting life in a physical way. And so that is the circle in the paisley shapes of the yin yang. The concept then, you have to ask yourself, if there were no ugliness, then could there be beauty? And if there were no darkness, then what would we call sunlight? This is the concept of the yin yang. In the 3rd century BC, and I would imagine other thinkers in between, also contemplated this. But in the 3rd century BC, Zeno of Citium founded the philosophy of Stoicism. And the central philosophy is that accepting this moment as it presents itself, and not by allowing yourself to be controlled by desire for pleasure or by the fear of pain. Certain philosophers, such as Seneca, discussed that virtue is sufficient for happiness. And so a sage, or someone who's attained a certain level of wisdom, would be emotionally resilient to misfortune. Another concept of this is the Hermetic principle. And the Hermetic principles is usually credited to Hermes Trismegistus. We're talking 2000 years BC, which puts it in line with Abraham, like Abraham of the Old Testament. This is a very old concept. Hermeticism became increasingly popular, especially during the Renaissance, because experimental science was starting to blossom. And the reason that is because in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, they generally were able to question kind of what the collective assumptions were, but also what the collective requirements to accept were. It was legitimately dangerous prior to this. And then with Columbus being able to, sail to the Americas instead of falling off the edge, for him to get to a completely new place that wasn't supposed to be able to exist, this did offer people the ability to kind of question what was being accepted as the truth. And so basically what Hermeticism does is it offers ancient wisdom. It doesn't revolve around these different concepts of good and evil or good guy and bad guy. Anyway, the 4th Hermetic principle is the principle of polarity. And the concept is, if you have two things that are opposites, so a lot of people think of hot and cold, love and hate. These are supposedly opposites. And that's what we teach children. We teach, 2 and 3-year-olds hot, cold. But these opposites, even though they're entirely different and irreconcilable, they're actually just degrees. So you have love and hate, or hot and cold. But there's this degree in the middle where the like and the dislike, or the hotness and the coldness, becomes so faint that it's difficult to distinguish between them. And so the other question too is where it switches from hot to cold. There's a point there where you may think it's hot on a cold day or cold on a hot day, right? And so it can be so faint that it's difficult to distinguish, but it also might just be that day, or the perspective of you having felt it. Even though love and hate are considered opposites in our everyday life, they're actually polar samesies. With the hot and the cold, and whether it would be your perspective of, is it hot today and does the water feel cold, or is it cold today and does the water feel hot? There's another example of this, right? So let's say that you're growing a tree, and so the tree grows and the tree gets larger and larger. And And so the trunk is getting stronger and stronger. Like that's +1 for the tree. It has more leaves. +1 for the tree. More roots. Ooh, +1 for the tree. We're getting stronger and we're being able to take in more energy from the sun, put out more carbon dioxide, or take in more carbon dioxide, put out more oxygen. This is all really awesome. Unless there's moles around. Then that's -1 for the tree and +1 for the moles. Or hey, there's more homes for animals. Like +1. Maybe they'll pollinate me. Maybe they'll pollinate my tree. +1 tree, +1 pollinator. But what if they're termites? -1 for the tree, +1 for the termites. So how are we keeping track? Who's winning and who's losing when the tree grows? Nobody's winning and nobody's losing. We're all just existing. The tree is existing. It's getting larger. It's just the intelligence of the universe is pushing the tree to grow because that's all there is to do. That's all there is to do here. There is nothing else for a tree to choose to do. A tree can't just be like, well, I don't feel like growing. I want to stay small. I want to stay a sapling. I can't do that. It's not a thing. The universe's intelligence pushes it to grow. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's not so good. It gets super big. It creates a lot of shade. If it's really close to your house, now you have to trim it. And do you know how expensive that is actually, by the way? It's like $800 just to trim a tree. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it, this tree trimmers, because it seems dangerous and everything. I'm just saying it's good for the tree trimmer. It's bad for your pocketbook. You just have to acknowledge, it has to be acknowledged that some things are good for some and bad for others, which just means it's good and bad. And so can it really be either? It must be neither. There's no way to be sure that what you're doing is the right thing. Parents, this is like the problem with parents. I wish I remembered who the quote was. I watched a documentary and they said there's two things that can go wrong when parenting. And one of them is that the right things don't happen. And the other thing is that the wrong things do happen. And every single thing that you do as a parent can be boiled down to the right thing or the wrong thing. Sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. And for this child, it might be right. And for that child, it might be wrong. And so the only thing you can do is do your best. A good example of this is if you've seen The Walking Dead in the very first season, Amy and Andrea are in the boat and they're talking about fishing knots. Andrea's like, why are you doing that knot? That's the wrong knot to be using. Didn't Dad ever teach you this other knot? I don't know anything about fishing. And Amy's like, no, he never used that knot. That doesn't make any sense. Why would he do that? Because we didn't ever keep them. And Andrea's like, what are you talking about? We were fishing for the dinner table. Then it started to dawn on them that, oh, Dad knew that you needed to catch the fish and knew that I needed to let them go. Sometimes doing the right thing is unclear and you still may never know if what you're doing is correct. There's no way to verify anything. You might even look at yourself and say, oh wow, how did I ever think that was right for me? So if you can't be sure about what's right for you, you can never be sure about what's right for someone else. And so there's no reason to worry about it. This actually reminds me of another story. This is a Zen parable where I'll just kind of give you the short version. Basically a farmer has a horse, runs away. His neighbors will say, it's so terrible. He says maybe. And then the horse comes back and it brings back wild horses. And all his neighbors say, oh wow, isn't that amazing? And he says maybe. His son is breaking the horse. The horse bucks him off and he has to go to the hospital. And his neighbors will say, isn't that horrible? Maybe. Soon, General comes through their town and takes all the able-bodied men to fight in a war. Because the son was in the hospital, he wasn't able to go. And so all the neighbors said, oh, isn't that amazing? No matter what, you don't really know. There's no way to know. In fact, there's no way to know about anything at all. The best you can do is your best. Honestly, your life is just a treadmill. Every single hurdle that you repeatedly jump is just continuously coming up. It's coming up. It's coming up. It doesn't go away unless you do something to make these hurdles go away. Examples of hurdles that I've chosen to jump. I chose to have a dog. I chose to get married. I chose to start a business. I chose to have a smartphone. I chose to have a car. And keeping up with all of that. Those are all hurdles that I choose to jump. I also chose for a long time to abuse my body with booze, sugar, and overall a horrible diet, not drinking water for months at a time, complaining, victimization, and then systematically undoing all of that. Humans think that they can just add a few specific items to their air quote good list and just remove all the things from their air quote bad list and they'll be happy. But whoa, watch out, because that's the hedonic treadmill, folks. I read about a study in the book, so good, highly recommend. In the book, Everything is Fucked by Mark Manson, highly recommend. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is also a really great book. I read it I'm not exaggerating, in a day. And in this book, he talked about this study from Brickman and Campbell called Hedonic Relativism. And so what they did is they asked people to take a pager, it was a long time ago, to take a pager pager and go through their day, and whenever the pager would beep them, to just stop and write down from a scale from 1 to 10, how did they feel that day? And what the researchers found is that on average, basically everybody just bobbered at a 7. You know, there were some obvious spikes like, oh, we got married, or oh, had a baby, or, you know, if they wanted to have a baby, they had a baby, and that was very exciting, right? So they're a 10 that day. And also there were obviously like sad things that happened to them. You know, they lost family members or lost a job, whatever. And so in those situations, you know, they put 1 or 3 or, you know, whatever. But essentially they all bobbered back to the 7. You know, it might have taken a little longer for some, a little shorter for others. They all kind of like returned to this 7 without fail. Now we think that we have these constants in our world. We think that we are constants in our world. We think that I'm always going to feel the way that I do. I'm always going to, you know, love the person that I love. I'm always going to think the way that I think, and that's never going to change. We are not constant. We're just under the impression that everything sucks just a little bit. But even your pain threshold changes. I mean, you get tattoos. It gets really easy after a while. You know, I mean, people fall asleep getting tattoos. And not me. I don't. People have this pain threshold that changes. And so this brings me to the next topic, which is from Ekhart Tolle's, in his book, A New Earth, he talks about the concept called the pain body. The general concept of this is that the emotional pain that you carry around with you is essentially like a shadow that lives within you. So there's a fundamental difference between instinctive responses and emotions. The general concept of this is that the emotional pain that you carry around with you is basically like a shadow that lives within you. In order to discuss that a little bit further, we have to kind of go back a little bit and understand kind of how this builds up. And so there's a fundamental difference between instinctive responses and emotions. So now an instinctive response is basically a physiological reaction to an event. So like a bodily reaction. So like you get sweaty, right? Like, so let's say that you are out hiking, you hear rustling in the trees. You're starting to sweat. Your heart is starting to palpitate, and you're like, what is that noise? What is that? Like, is it a rattlesnake? Is it a bear? Is it just another hiker? Like, what is it? That's a physiological reaction. And then eventually you see that it's a bear. And when the bear comes out, you may fight or flight, right? or freeze. Hopefully you'll do the right one under the right circumstances. So this is an instinctive response, which is a physiological or a bodily reaction to an event. If you are having an emotion, it's a physical body reaction to a thought, not to an outer stimulus, right? The emotion is the body's reaction to a thought. Like, I just need to reiterate, because it's very important. An emotion is the body's response to a thought. This is going to get really sad for a second, but one time I saw a dog on the side of the road, and I was really upset about it. And I drove all the way to the town over, which is half an hour. I could get myself really worked up about it. Like 20 minutes later, I could think about it and I could get really worked up about it. I could cry again if I wanted. Maybe not right now, but at the time. And that is an emotional reaction, is a body's response to the thought. Because you aren't actually running or moving away, then that feeling and the energy associated with that feeling gets stuck. Switch gears, talk a little bit about a different author, a different book. This is classic self-development book. Highly recommend. The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. He talks about how he talks about so many amazing things, but the related point here is that our protective energies, he calls them, have adapted to defending us psychologically, which wasn't really their purpose. You know, they're supposed to be defending us from the outside world, from the animals that can eat us, and they're supposed to be protecting us from weather, or I don't know, right? Like, it's not supposed to be so focused on the inside. But now that we don't have these kinds of external problems to deal with, our major struggles end up being with our own fears, our own insecurities, our own destructive behavior patterns, and not with outside forces. He says, if you protect yourself perfectly, then you will never grow. And at the end of the day, when someone asks, how was your day? The normal response is, not too bad, or I'll survive. Ugh, this reminds me of Jeremy so much. He says this stuff all the time. And what does that mean? That means that they made it through without getting hurt. The longer you live like this, the more closed you become. The way that I do this is I get defensive and angry for essentially no reason. I've started to catch on to that. Other ways that you might do this are to get overly emotional about nothing, basically, to flake and ghost on people, to quit everything prematurely, to never commit, sarcasm, paranoia, or anxiety. Like, why would I say that? So-and-so must think I'm so stupid. This is my own list. I have no idea. There could be many others. Like, probably probably an incountable number. Is incountable? But back to Ekhart Tolle. But later, when you think of an event that you haven't made peace with that causes you to have that emotional reaction, then you encourage your body to have another reaction. Apparently, this is still a big deal because you're still engaging with it. If you're still engaging with it and your body doesn't know how to tell the difference between a real event and a thought event or a past event that you're thinking about again, then it must still matter. And so you could get worked up about it. You're getting continually worked up about it, but you're still not really getting rid of the energy. And so it's just sitting in there. This is what this is why people talk about like blocked chakras, right? This is how this happens. So the worst part about this is that a lot of people will they'll just sit there and they'll just simmer with it. People live like this every single day where they just shove it down, shove it down, shove it down. They literally don't realize that they're like, this is going to sound dramatic, but they don't realize that they're like poisoning their minds. They're literally poisoning themselves. Could you chill, bro? You're so loud. They literally wrap this up in their identity. Don't understand how to live a life without that aspect of themselves, quote unquote. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you're the addict, maybe you're the quitter, maybe you're the gambler, whatever your story is. And every once in a while, your pain body gets bored. And then it'll use any opportunity to make you feel like shit. It'll use car trouble. It'll use a surprise bill. It'll use low grades. It'll use damaged relationships. Sometimes your guard is down and it's like basically nothing. And you're just like, fuck this. Fuck everything, I can't do this anymore. Until you start to spot this happening. And when you spot it happening, that's when you can fix it. So, something that I thought was super relevant to this topic, Trent and Allie, huge shout out, absolutely love them. They were living van life. They were in Patagonia. Where they were, there was a lot of pointy rock, and they got a flat tire. Trent and Allie have notoriously bad Mercury retrogrades. They live don't anymore, but they lived in a vehicle. Would repeatedly, like 3 times a year, they'd have really bad luck for 3 weeks in a row, and this was one of those times. Allie, after everything was said and done, Allie had said that this was high quality fun. And to be honest, Allie is just a very positive, just a glowing soul. Part of me was like, how are you always so positive? Now I'm catching on. Now I'm understanding. It's all in your mind. I read an article on Psychology Today from David DeSalvo, and he says about the effects of problem solving on the brain. So these findings help reinforce the strategy whereby individuals may be able to improve their emotional functioning. This is mood, anxiety, and their experience with depression. And so this is literally, I just sounded like, what's his name? Chris Traeger. I just sounded like Chris Traeger. Anyway, boom, high quality memory making. For real. It's a real thing. And I guess that makes sense because a lot of times we're like, oh, it's funny now. It wasn't funny then, but it's funny now. That kind of thing happens all the time. Now we're going to start to get a little bit serious, just so everybody is aware. We can't bring this up without talking about real trauma. So when people don't want this whole concept to be true, they start to bring up real trauma, okay? Quote unquote, real trauma. They're like, oh, well, famine and war and sexual abuse and human trafficking and that's all fucking horrible. I agree. I'm not saying it doesn't agree. And it makes sense that people will go there even if they haven't suffered a quote real trauma, because this concept places all of the responsibility for all of the shit in their life squarely on their shoulders. This is where people think that they've got me. They're like, oh, she can't possibly justify rape or murder. And you're right, I can't do that. I can't. Why would I even try to do that, right? But I know this from an intimate perspective. I was sexually abused from the time I was 5 until I was 12. And yeah, he was the rock bottom type of person. He was the type of person that no one would miss. And I've been open about this since about I graduated high school, because to be honest, I've always been very outspoken. I don't see how this could possibly be thought of as my fault. There's no possible way. And I don't think that this is something that, I don't think that anybody should be ashamed to be abused. It's not that I don't understand it. It's just that I don't understand it. You can understand it in an empathy level, but you can't understand it in an intellectual level. A lot of people would ask me, like, how can that not be negative? How would you not go back and take it away if you could? My mom would tell you, like, she would take it away if she could in a heartbeat. I mean, that's just not how I feel. And we can talk about soul contracts another time, but that's just really not how I feel. 82% of juvenile victims of sexual assault are female. 90% of adult rape victims are female. Females aged 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely than the general population to be victims of rape, attempted rape, or sexual assault. It's estimated that 1 in 6 American women have experienced an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime.
I want to take a second to just kind of make the point, because I don't think that this transitioned quite as clearly as I was hoping, but I just want to make the point that I'm bringing these statistics up because while I don't think that this should be happening, it is happening. The people that this is happening to do need to continue to live their lives. The people that are experiencing this do need to live and move forward, and they need to recognize that in the future, ideally, when this doesn't happen anymore, we don't have to discuss it. But we will, and we can forward.
Most likely, a majority of these people look back on their experiences as pretty fucking negative. And I'm going to go on the record to say that my definition of not a negative experience is very personal. And it's not that this or any other unarguably difficult situation in your life is good for you or deserved. And remember that the concept of polarity exists. Something not being negative does not mean that it's positive. This doesn't mean that I get to decide that your traumas are or aren't negative. This is my channel. This is just what I want to think. I'd love for you to link your own channels below so that I can see what you have to say. All this does is give context to your life. It gives dimension. I'm not telling you not to have an emotional reaction. I'm just telling you to try not to become closed where it lives in you forever. It's your choice. This is this example. You get to choose, is this item a hurdle that gets added to your treadmill over and over? You know, you can minimize certain things in your life, right? You can shun your family members. You can have agoraphobia. You can stay inside all day. You can work from home very easily now. You could never get to know any of your coworkers. You could decide never to, have children or pets, or, you could try your best to avoid loss in your life or to avoid anybody taking advantage of you. This also means never having some of the most high caliber experiences of the human condition. I never said that anything was good, and I never said that trauma was good. I don't believe that, some of the horrific things that can happen to a human are good for you or not that bad. Hearing a blessing in disguise is so fucking annoying when you're going through something really difficult. But all of these things are just a thing that happened. You don't need to roll them up in your identity. Like, your options are to pack it up in your mind with a bow and send it away from you peacefully, or you can put it in a Ziploc bag, squeeze all the air out, like almost like you're protecting it, wrap it up in a cloth, put it in a paper bag, and then bury it deep in your mind. Then basically refuse to walk by it. Spoiler, like, it will fester and seep into the drinking water. Nothing and neither of these will change the past, and neither of them are wrong, but one of them is infinitely better. There's never an end to the lows in life. There's never any reason to believe that if it's not okay, it isn't over. If you like this content, share it with a friend or a family member, like stranger on the street, I don't care. Anybody, whoever you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more. But until next time, later, gator.